Good afternoon, everyone. As expected, global warming's to blame for all the record cold temperatures. USA Today will say, hey, don't let this cold fool you. Climate scientists say that, wait, I thought the article was about record cold, but they'll tell you that it's the warmest in 100 years in the southwest US. Santa's going to need to move to the South Pole, according to the Canadian government. And all because of global warming, the minus 22 Fahrenheit sending obscure smoke off the Great Lakes, and Niagara Falls freezing, and the boat rescues across the Hudson River as a vessel's trapped there. That's all due to record heat, basically. But down in Australia, it is record heat. The jet streams are flipping out of place. We're going into a grand solar minimum. Let's look at the last two and see where the matchups are in temperature, where it's cooling now, which it will continue to cool just like it did in the Maunder minimum. And while you're watching the video, please remember to subscribe to Adapt 2030 and click that bell so you can get the latest updates. Let's start off with American thinker Jack Hellner. Good article. He points out correctly that the news media is now focusing on it's probably being caused at least in part by global warming, all these record cold temperatures that the US and Canada are experiencing along with Asia. And he also correctly points out that the experts are just making things up as they're going along. Because when I grew up, none of the predictions that they had talked about with the IPCC of the global warming and all these things in the 90s has ever come true. And now they've flip-flopped and turned it into climate change. And now anything fits climate change. And they just keep on rolling. What about the Arctic sea ice in 2007 that was not supposed to be there? Oh, let's push it to 2009. And then it didn't happen, and let's push it to 2013. That didn't happen either, Peter Wadhams. And then it keeps going to 2017. Oops, let's just move it to 2020. And it's been like this again and again and again in the climate debate. And all they do is change their predictions and change their models, and they just keep saying, oh, it's going to happen in the future. It hasn't. But all the solar forecasters are saying we're going into a grand solar minimum, and it is happening now, and everything is pointing that direction. USA Today, here's the story. Climate change is to blame, absolutely, for the record low temperatures and freezing rain and heavy snow. You got to blame global warming on that. So the video they have in the article that they wrote, don't let it fool you, says climate scientists. This record cold is because of record heat. And they will even tell you in the southwest US temperatures are some of the warmest in the last 100 years, although the article's about the cold wave that swept through the United States and still is sweeping. But the bottom line for them is there's a big difference between weather and climate. Anytime it's 1/10 of 1 degree over temperature, that's climate. That's the general way we're going. But anytime it's super record cold for weeks on end, blasting cold records back 200 years, well, that's just weather. I do give them a little credit, though. They talk about weather happens in short term and climate about long-term trends. So let's look back at a few longer-term trends here coming up. All the while, this cold is coming. NOAA and NASA guarantee it's going to be the second warmest or the third hottest year on record, even though it's record cold right now. Now, the Canadian government, not to be silent in this matter either, now with the children, claims that Santa Claus is going to have to move to the South Pole because the North Pole is getting too warm. Now, wait a second. This is a Canadian government website, Policy Horizons Canada, a government website. Here it is. Santa's moving to the South Pole. Was that before or after the record cold that just blasted Alberta, an entire province, all under severe cold warnings? And yeah, okay. Anyway, Santa maybe could move there. Maybe Santa could just move to where we had all these record cold temperatures. Nice there for them to do their tool shop and workshop. But looking back in the historical record, let's go back to the last two grand solar minimums. Dalton minimum in the pink, 1800s. Maunder minimum, the coldest that we've experienced in the last 400 years. 1650, that's when the Thames River froze. And I might also ask you to use your common sense and say, well, if the globe is supposed to be continually warming into infinity, how is there that incredibly steep drop-off that's happening right now? So then all we have to do is really, if climate is longer cycles like the USA Today article says, I'll agree. Let's go back and look at 400-year time frames. Maunder minimum, this is the temperature reconstruction. Now I ask you to really use your eyes on this one. Alaska, way warmer than it is today. Areas where we just got the all-time record cold across Canada and the United States, that swath of dark blue, that's an exact match fingerprint right there. Look at Asia, record cold as well. See that dark blue in the African desert down there? That's where it just snowed for the second time in 2 years in the Sahara Desert. And again, seeing this year, it's minus 22 Fahrenheit and the winds mixing together. You get this, what they call smoke fog coming off the Great Lakes in Duluth, Minnesota. We saw that back in 2016 as well. They saw it in the 1970s quite frequently when it was much cooler back then. And then some amazing images coming out. They call it the Big Freeze at Niagara Falls. Minus 29 degrees Celsius, breaking a 130-year-old record. Singapore even breaking records for cold and wet. Stunning images coming out here of the ice. This is down next to the viewing platform. Daytime view into dusk. And again, I'll go right back and reference that USA Today article that says climate is longer term, and let's look at the longer term. Instead of just 40 years or 100 years, 120 years like the industrial age, let's look back longer in history and really see if there's any climate cycles going on there. Graphic here of Scandinavia. So right around, what, say 1270. Looks like the temperatures were warmer than they are today. Now, I don't know how many SUVs were driving around 1270 to raise the climate temperature that much from when it came off the last grand solar minimum. But if you compare that, let's say starting around 1150 rolling into 1300 over with our right side starting at 1900, you see the similarity where it comes off the cool. It has a heating spike, it drops back into a cooling spike, and then there's a heating spike followed by a gargantuan drop in temperature. This is where we are heading. Solar physicists have proven it, and I don't know why we're still arguing about global warming. Here's the Dalton minimum. This is at the very minimum what we're going back to. So the temperatures where we are now are going to come down to Dalton minimum type temperatures. And our jet streams are going to mix up, and this is the type of things that are going to kill our crops. Coast Guard rescues boats on the frozen Hudson River. Look at the icebreakers. Nobody was expecting this waterway to freeze this quickly. Some places are at least a foot thick. 2 days of record cold temperatures. Okay, these are some of the oldest places in the country. And if you're not from the United States, these are some of the oldest cities in the United States. From the days when the Mayflower landed, when these cities were settled, all the way back to the Revolutionary War, they have been keeping temperature records. And that smashed through all of them in all these places. You start to see these frozen river images through the Revolutionary War pictures as well. When we get down into Virginia and you start to look at the pictures of Washington crossing rivers on horseback with cannons, that's over frozen ice. Those are rivers they're walking over. And we're starting to get back into the same thing again. So cold on the Hudson River, freezing. And then what's happening also down in Australia, all-time record heat in Sydney for 6 hours, and then 6 hours later the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Well, they had that heat bubble that came in there somehow. But wherever you look, there are extremes going on this planet. That's from the shifting jet streams, all brought on by a weakening magnetosphere and the effects from our sun. So I'm going to bring you back to the central England temperatures again. You'll find the same fingerprint globally for the Dalton minimum drop and the Maunder minimum drop in temperature. And I will bring it to your attention why on the right side of this graph at our present time are we dropping off so steeply if we're supposed to be warming. This graphic here goes from 1800 up to approximately 2060, mapping out the solar cycles, the intensity of the solar output and the variability of our star. You can see it right here. It ebbs and it flows. It's in intensity. We are entering another low phase. Now that red line on the top there is the medium average going through the longer duration cycles, the 100-year cycles. But there's patterns and waves within patterns and waves. And when we look at longer time frames, we are going to drop back into, as you see on the right side, top graph, 2020, 2030, 2040, we are going to go into something very low in the solar activity. We have to go back and even stretch this chart further in time back into the early 1600s to encompass this same time area that we're about to repeat again. At the bare minimum, we are going into that 1800s super low called the Dalton minimum. And so many forecasters think that we are going into a Maunder type minimum. This is a society changing event. Both of these events changed society forever, including our technology, population migration, economic woes. You just need a history book to see what went on during these times. We are about to repeat this again, and I really believe that that's the reason they're not discussing it in the media. So next time you see these articles out in the news and you decide as an op-ed you want to answer to those articles, start showing them information like this, longer term cycles going back 400 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years in time instead of this minuscule 120 years we've been using to prove global warming. Get ready. We're heading back into a grand solar minimum. Your life's about to change in an instant. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video.